The gravel popped under the tires of Jonah Strickland's truck, like he owned the place. Maybe he thought he did. In Calloway, Texas, men like Jonah usually did. It was 11:43 at night. Serena Obi knew because she'd just counted the register and written the time on the deposit slip in her neat, small handwriting. The same handwriting she'd used on patrol logs in Kandahar 8 years earlier. The Sundown Fuel and Grill sat off Route 9 like something forgotten. 2 gas pumps, a diner that seated 18, a bathroom with a latch that never caught right. Serena had been working the closing shift for 4 months. She knew every creak of the floorboards, every shadow the parking lot lights threw across the gravel at different hours. She noticed things. That was the problem with people who'd been trained the way she had. They never stopped noticing. Jonah came in first, then 2 more. Then, by the time Serena had moved the deposit bag behind the counter, 4 more had filed through the door, spreading across the small space, the way men do when they want you to feel the room shrinking. 7 of them total, all late 20s, early 30s. All from the Ridgecrest crew, a loose collection of guys who'd grown up together in the same dead-end part of the county and decided that made them something. Serena turned around and looked at them. Now, before we go any further, you need to understand something about who was standing behind that counter. Serena Obi was 31 years old, 5'6". She was wearing a black sundown t-shirt with a grease stain near the hem and a pair of boots she'd had since Fort Bragg. She had her hair pulled back in a low bun. She looked, by any reasonable account, like a woman at the end of a long shift who wanted to go home and sleep. What she was something else entirely. She'd spent 4 years as an Army Combatives instructor. Certified at Level 4, which meant she didn't just teach hand-to-hand combat. She'd helped design the curriculum for a training pipeline that cycled through hundreds of soldiers a year. Before that, 2 deployments. Before that, a childhood in Houston where her grandmother, a woman named Bertie who'd grown up in rural Louisiana and taken exactly no nonsense from anyone, had told her, "You don't start things, baby, but you finish them." She was good at finishing things. "We're closed," she said. Jonah Strickland leaned on the counter. He had the particular smile of someone who'd never once been told no and meant it. "Sign says 11. It's not 11 yet. Register's closed. I can't sell you anything. We're not here to buy anything." He looked around at the others, slow and theatrical, and a couple of them laughed. "We just want to talk." Serena set both hands flat on the counter, calm. About what? What followed was a kind of conversation that isn't really a conversation. It's a performance. Jonah started talking about the new owner of the property 2 parcels over. A black family named the Atiums, who'd bought the old Carver farm and were building a house there. He started talking about how things were changing in Calloway. How some people didn't understand how things worked out here. How maybe someone needed to explain it to them. He was looking directly at Serena while he said all of this. She listened. She didn't move. Her eyes went, without any drama, without him noticing, to the door, the gap between the counter and the wall, the position of each man in the room, the 2 by the window, the 1 near the door, the 3 clustered in the center, Jonah, right in front of her. She filed it the way she'd been trained to, the way you file a room when you walk into it and something feels wrong, except she'd been doing this so long it wasn't filing anymore, it was just seeing. "You done?" she asked. Jonah blinked. "Excuse me? Are you done talking?" The smile flickered. "You got a mouth on you, I've been told." One of the men by the window, stocky, red cap, she'd already clocked him as the one most likely to move first because he kept shifting his weight, took a step forward. "Maybe you should learn some respect." Serena looked at him, not at his face. At his shoulder, his lead foot, the angle of his hips. She looked the way a mechanic looks at an engine. She was already done being afraid. "I'm going to give you all one chance," she said. Her voice was flat as pavement. "Walk out. Get in your trucks. Go home." That landed wrong, the way she suspected it would. Jonah laughed. The others laughed. Redcap, whose name was Dean, she'd hear it later, took another step and said something ugly that we don't need to repeat here. Serena came around the counter. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not a movie fight. There was no music, no slow motion, no clean choreography. It was efficient. It was brutal in the specific way that trained violence is brutal. Not chaotic, not emotional, but precise, like someone correcting errors on a test. Serena moved through the space like she'd already memorized it because she had. She knew where the stool was. She knew the angle of the counter corner. She knew that if she put Dean on the floor first, the two by the window would hesitate for exactly the window she needed. She was right. By the time the third man was down, holding his wrist, making a sound she recognized from the training mat, the sound that means something just bent the way it wasn't supposed to, the remaining 4 had backed toward the door. Jonah was against the wall. He was looking at her the way people look at something they fundamentally misunderstood, like a small dog that turned out to be feral, like a door that opened onto nothing. "Who are you?" he said. She picked up the deposit bag from the floor where it had fallen. "The woman who was about to go home," she said. "Get out." They got out. Serena stood in the empty diner for a moment after the trucks pulled away. The neon sundown sign buzzed. A fly hit the light above the coffee station. She looked down at her hands, steady, and thought about her grandmother Bertie, who had once told her that the point of being strong wasn't to use it, it was to not need to be afraid. She'd understood it better some years than others. She called the county sheriff's department. She filed a report. She was professional and clear and left nothing out. The deputy who took her statement, a young woman named Keeley who looked like she'd been on the job about 14 months, asked her twice to confirm that she had in fact been alone. "Yes," Serena said. "I was alone." The next morning her manager, a tired man named Bev Ortega, who ran the sundown like a man who had accepted that nothing would ever be easy, came in early. He'd heard. In Calloway, things traveled. He stood in the doorway of his own office looking at Serena sitting across from him, and he didn't quite know how to arrange his face. "You okay?" he finally asked. "I'm fine," she said. "The Strickland family has a son who assaulted a woman in her place of work in front of 6 witnesses," she said, "which is what the report says." Bev opened his mouth and closed it again. Then he nodded. What she didn't tell Bev, what she didn't tell most people, was that the night before, after the sheriff's deputy had gone, and the lights in the parking lot were making their regular shadows across the gravel, she'd sat in her car for a while. Not because she was shaken. Because she was thinking. She'd been thinking about the Adium family. About the fact that what Jonah had said, and what he'd implied, which was worse, had not been said in a vacuum. It had been said with 7 men standing behind it, which meant it was a message, which meant the Adiums would need to hear about it, and not from the county sheriff's department form letter that would eventually make its way to their mailbox in 6 to 8 weeks. She drove out to the Carver farm, the Adium farm. She corrected herself the next afternoon. A woman named Amora Adium answered the door. Mid-40s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, the kind of face that had learned to size people up fast and had gotten very accurate at it. She looked at Serena the way you look at someone unexpected. "You're the woman from the sundown," she said. It wasn't a question. Calloway was small. "Yes," Serena said. "I need to tell you what happened last night. All of it." They sat at the Adium's kitchen table for 2 hours. Amora's husband, a man named Philip, who'd grown up in Beaumont and had the kind of quiet that comes from having thought carefully about everything, sat across from Serena and listened without interrupting. Their daughter, who was 14 and had been doing homework at the table when Serena arrived, was asked to move to another room and did so with the specific resentment of a teenager who knows something important is happening. Serena told them everything. The names she'd heard. The things that had been said. The specific language Jonah had used about their property, their presence, what he'd called the natural order of things out here. She didn't soften it. She'd learned that softening things did people a disservice. When she finished, Philip was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You stopped them." "Last night," Serena said. "That doesn't solve anything." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't." What came next was slow and unglamorous in the way that real things usually are. Serena connected the ATMs with a civil rights attorney in Austin she'd known through a veterans network, a sharp woman named Corinne Das, who had forgotten more about property harassment law than most people ever learned. Philip documented the incidents. There had been others, smaller ones, that they'd absorbed quietly and filed a formal complaint with the county. Jonah Strickland was charged with 3 counts, including aggravated assault, and the 2 men who'd actually made physical contact with Serena were charged alongside him. Jonah's father, a man named Gerald Strickland, who owned a significant amount of the commercial property in Calloway's 1 block downtown, and had apparently believed this made his son untouchable, made it known through the particular channels that small towns have that he was not happy. Serena heard about it. She received 2 voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. She saved them. She forwarded them to Corinne Das, who forwarded them to the county DA's office, where they became evidence of witness intimidation. Things have a way of unraveling when you pull the right thread. But here's the part that matters most. And I mean this, out of everything that happened, this is the part I want you to remember. About 6 weeks after the night at the Sundown, Serena got a call from a woman at a community center in the next town over. The center ran programs for women and girls. After-school things, workshops, the kind of low-budget infrastructure that holds communities together with tape and volunteer hours. The woman on the phone said she'd heard what had happened. She'd heard through 3 different people, in 3 different ways, and the story had grown by the time it reached her, but the core of it was the same. She asked if Serena would come speak. Serena almost said no. She wasn't a speaker. She didn't have a program. She didn't have slides or a nonprofit or a curriculum binder. She said yes anyway. She stood in front of 22 women and girls in a church basement on a Thursday evening, and she talked for 40 minutes about things she'd never said out loud before. About learning to read a room before you walk into it. About the difference between awareness and fear. They're not the same thing, she told them. Awareness is a tool, fear is a reaction, and you can have one without the other. About the 2-second decision tree that every trained soldier learns and most civilians never know exists. Exit, de-escalate, engage, in that order, always in that order, because your goal is never to fight, your goal is to go home. She talked about what she'd thought about in those 4 minutes at the Sundown. She told them she hadn't been thinking about hurting anyone. She'd been thinking about getting from one side of the situation to the other side of it, intact. A girl in the back row, maybe 15, wearing a volleyball jersey, doing her best to look bored and failing, raised her hand. "Were you scared?" Serena looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Of course I was, but you didn't run." "Running was option 1, Serena said. "I looked at the door. I calculated whether I could make it. I decided I couldn't, not safely. So I moved to option 2. "What's option 2? "Make sure I'm the most dangerous thing in the room." The girl stared at her. Then she nodded, slowly, like she was filing something away. Serena left that night thinking she'd probably never be invited back. She was wrong. By the 3rd session, there were 40 women in the room, ranging in age from 12 to 67. By the 6th, they'd moved to the VFW hall, which had more space. She started teaching basic combatives, not self-defense in the soft workshop sense, but actual physical training adapted for people without military backgrounds. She taught them how to fall, how to create distance, how to use what was around them. She taught them that strength was not the point. Position was the point. And leverage was the point. And the 3 seconds you bought yourself with good decision-making were worth more than anything else. She called the program grounded, because that's what it was. Because when everything else is uncertain, You need to know how to stay on your feet. Philip Adium came to the fourth session with a check from a small local foundation he'd quietly contacted after their kitchen table conversation. It wasn't a large check. It covered insurance and the cost of the mats. It was enough. Jonah Strickland pled no contest to a reduced charge 6 months later. He was fined, put on probation, and required to complete a diversion program. His father's name appeared in a civil suit that was eventually settled out of court. The Adiums finished their house. Amora planted a garden along the fence line that she told Serena was partly practical and partly a statement. Serena kept working the closing shift at the sundown because she needed the income and because Bev gave her Thursdays off. She kept showing up at the VFW hall on Thursday nights. She kept teaching. There's something about the moment when a person who has been trained to be invisible decides to stop being invisible. It doesn't always look dramatic. It doesn't always look like anything. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing behind a diner counter at 11:43 at night, looking at 7 men taking up the space in a room, and deciding, quietly, finally, with no ceremony whatsoever, that she is not going to move. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is simply refuse to be what someone else decided they were. Serena Obi learned that at Fort Bragg. She learned it from her grandmother Bertie before that. And on a Thursday night in a VFW hall in Calloway, Texas, she passed it on.